Hola, buenas tardes, noches a todas y a todos. Muchas gracias por venir. Bueno, no sé ni para qué hago presentación porque todos sabéis a qué venís, ¿no? Y quiénes son estas personas que nos acompañan hoy. Pero bueno, os quiero hablar un poquito del programa del Museo Reina Sofia, donde está enmarcada esta actividad, que es el programa Documentos, que lo veis en la pantalla, ¿no? Que está precisamente dedicado a explorar un poco las relaciones entre arte contemporáneo y actividad editorial. Y dentro de esta línea, pues nos parece importante que el cómic se abra camino. Es algo que creo que todavía queda mucho por hacer, ¿no? En abrir un lugar para el cómic dentro de las instituciones y desde luego por parte del programa de actividades del Museo Reina Sofia es algo que queremos hacer. Ya comenzamos el año pasado con una exposición y una actividad, ¿no? Sobre autoras de cómic underground. Ahora hemos conseguido traer aquí a Chris Ware, que es un lujazo, y bueno, pues queremos seguir un poco con esta intención. Ya sabéis todos quién es Chris Ware, sabéis toda la renovación, ¿no? que ha realizado en el mundo del cómic, estando a la vez inmerso en una genealogía que se remonta pues un poco a los orígenes, ¿no? de este lenguaje y bueno, pues cómo nos ha enseñado y nos sigue enseñando todas las infinitas posibilidades que tiene el cómic o la historieta y que tiene todavía por ofrecernos, ¿no? en el presente. Bueno, ha ganado pues todos los premios más destacados de este ámbito: Guardian First Book Award, Festival Internacional de la Bande Dessinée d'Angoulême, el premio Eisner. Bueno, se ha expuesto en museos como el Whitney Museum of American Art, el Museum of Contemporary Art o el Centre Georges Pompidou más recientemente. Y bueno, también sabéis que ha desarrollado una labor como ilustrador y diseñador gráfico, pues las portadas de New Yorker o el diseño de la serie Crazy and Ignatz de Herriman, pues es quizá lo que más conocemos, ¿no? Voy a presentar también a Carla Berrocal, que como bien sabéis pues es también ilustradora y autora de cómics. Algunas de sus publicaciones recientes más destacadas son Epigrafías, la geometría de los silencios, relatos reales de vidas imaginarias, o Doña Concha, la rosa y la espina. Y bueno, por este proyecto recibió pues la beca, ¿no? de la ECID y del Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores en Roma, y también a comisario junto a Elisa McCausland la exposición Presentes, autoras de TV de ayer y hoy, ¿no? También muy importante para esa visibilidad y para ese establecimiento de genealogías. Y por último, Enrique Bordes es arquitecto, investigador, especialista en gráfica y cómic. Como él dice, ¿no? Pues es un arquitecto que tiene una tesis en cómic, lo cual es bastante singular, ¿no? Y bueno, pues compagina su trabajo profesional con la docencia universitaria y también pues tuvo esa super beca, ¿no? de la Real Academia de España en Roma, y es autor de la publicación que es ya referencia de cómic Arquitectura Narrativa. Y bueno, y yo misma, que soy Raquel Jimeno, soy coordinadora de actividades aquí en el Museo Reina Sofia. Así que bueno, podemos comenzar ya la conversación. Vamos a hablar en inglés y luego ya pues abriremos al turno de preguntas. Esperemos que quede un poquito de tiempo.
This isn't working. Oh, it is working. Oh. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I can't believe all the people who are here, and thank you so much for the kind introduction, which I couldn't understand a word of. So I'm really sorry. I'm a ignorant American, but I am so flattered and moved to be here and in the museum, and so thank you. Gracias. I can say gracias. So. Right.
Bueno, darle un aplauso, ¿no? A esta persona.
How'd you do that?
Well, I will start to talk in English. My English is not very good, but I am an artist, not I don't talk in English a lot, so it is what it is.
Well, I'm an idiot. I can't speak Spanish at all. I'm so sorry. So.
Okay, I will start to talk about how the comics came to your life. I read that your aunt and you draw in a table with your mom and your aunt, and I would like to tell about that, about how the comic came to your life.
I think the first comics I remember reading were Peanuts by Charles Schulz, because the little pictures, everybody knows Charlie Brown, maybe, and Snoopy. Is that well enough known here in Spain? Those little drawings felt like real people to me when I was, or real kids when I was a little kid, and I would read the books that my grandfather, who was a newspaper editor, had gotten from the syndicate, and I would feel like I was like talking to my friends or something and reading those books. And it made me want to create people on paper in the same sort of way. My grandmother would work in the basement. She took a lot of photographs of our family and kept them organized in albums, and she would work on them at one end of a table, and at the other end of the table I would draw pictures and keep myself occupied. So
the organization is from your mother.
I think it's my grandmother, actually, in some ways. My mother was very encouraging. She sent me to art classes when I was very small, and they actually wanted me to draw from a nude model, but the museum, I wanted to, but the museum wouldn't let me do it because it was in Nebraska in the United States, but that's okay. I still learned what a museum was and what paintings were and learned how to draw from the art classes especially, so. And when I would finish a drawing, if my grandmother wasn't at the table anymore, she'd be up cooking dinner, I would crawl up the stairs where the door was, and it was shut, into the kitchen, and I would slide it under the door very quietly, and it was like publishing. I would send it to my grandmother and then wait for her reaction, so it's kind of an early version of printing your work, I guess. So.
And also you start also to read maybe older, no? But superheroes also in the... Please, I need to see you talking about superheroes. It's a personal fantasy.
Well, I mean, I was like a lot of kids my age who read these books about, muscled men in tights. I would trace the pictures of superheroes and then put my face on the bodies, kind of as a way of like, someday I'll be, and that never ever happened. And I don't know if anybody here remembers or not, or if things were different in Spain, but when our generation were kids and we read superheroes, we got beat up for it. We're made fun of. And now it's like businessmen read them and see the movies especially, and politicians talk about it's embarrassing. I don't know how it got to this. How did it get to this point? But it's whatever. That's the way the world is. So, and I kind of hope that at a certain point people forget that superheroes started in comic books and that they were always just movies. So now comics can be their own medium, completely free of that kind of. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know.
I read that you start to draw comics in the university, in the college, and you start to do some comic strips, and you became more professional, and I think when do you start to read more classic comics? When do you feel that you need to know more about history of comics, or how this search of comic history starts in you?
My mom, when I was about, 12 years old, started dating a television anchorman, a guy who read the news on TV, which immediately made me cool, because all my friends then would, when they would see him at my house, they'd say, "It's the TV guy." And I would think, yeah, that's my mom's boyfriend, and it was like the first time that I was kind of cool to my friends. He was a very interesting guy. He had grown up in Baltimore, Maryland, and he listened to early jazz, and he had all these books of early comics, including Crazy Cat. And it was the first time I ever saw Crazy Cat, and it scared me. I remember trying to read it, and he thought it was so funny, and I was like, it makes me feel weird. I really don't understand it.
With 12 years old, Crazy Cat, you are a genius.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. If you can understand the subtleties. And at that point, nobody even knew that Harriman was of mixed race or African American, so it just was like a old strip that people kind of remembered. But that was really the beginning of it. And then when I was in college, one of my friends, John Keene, who was very much into early newspaper comics, showed me a lot of reprints, and I bought a book of the Smithsonian collection of newspaper comics, and there was a liveliness and a humanity to that stuff, and especially the fact that the characters lived on the page. They weren't just drawings of people, the way superhero comics were. Those are illustrated stories. But the earliest comics were drawings that lived and came alive on the page, and they felt like real life, and that's what I liked most about them.
Do you think that the comic, it was starting in that era, and they have more freedom to do whatever they want?
Yeah, that's when the language was really being developed as something real, and I don't even think the cartoonists thought of it that way. They just thought, like, I got to think of an idea before 5 o'clock, and send it into the printer. But it was a living language that was developing at a very fast pace. The idea of pictures on a page that you would read and that would tell you a story and make you laugh. It was very strange and new and very exciting and immediate, I think. But it had a long history before that, certainly in Britain and in France as well. So I think the movies kind of killed it, though, because cartoonists started imitating the camera and imitating the language of film and incorporating that into the drawing. And then comics kind of lost their way and became the sort of imitative film on paper. And I just don't think they're as good. And the younger cartoonists now, over the past couple generations, I think have rediscovered the power of the original comics before they were kind of damaged by cinema. Oops, there we go.
Maybe Enrique
Sorry,
can ask something about the architecture of the page. I think you are very interested in this kind of comics because they work, as you say, with the page, and I think there is simple stories, but in your case there are very complicated, very heavy stories. So you pick this. What exactly do you take from these comics to your own language?
I think just a way of putting something on the page that feels warm and human, I also try to think about the cartoonists, say like Frank King, who did Gasoline Alley, who I think felt frustrated by the editorial limitations of being printed in a newspaper. I know he wanted to expand the potential for expression of comics beyond what the newspapers would permit, because I've read his diaries, and he was really trying to do that. And so I kind of want to honor that idea that those cartoonists were actually thinking at a higher level than their editors allowed them to. Harriman was enough of a genius that he somehow snuck it all in there anyway, and nobody really noticed, and hasn't really started noticing until the last 10 or 15 years. So.
Yo puedo seguir.
Sí, yo también, no, yo.
Tú verás.
I'm sorry, but I'm still kind of in shock. We were talking yesterday about dreaming, and I feel right now like dreaming. No? I feel very honored to be in this historical moment. No, the fact that I think we have to stop for a while and think that we have probably one of the most important creators to understand creation and art in the beginning of this century. And I think it's so historical and important that it's here in this museum. No? So I'm really thankful to be here.
Nice
and thank you to be here.
He smoked a whole lot of weed before we came out on the stage. So.
Well, I kind of that level. I mean, I actually I wanted to start in a level a little in that dreamy way, because when I discovered your work, it was very late at night. I didn't smoke anything. And I entered a bookstore that was open late at night. It was a Bips. They don't exist anymore. And you could buy these art books that they will arrive there, international art books. You wouldn't know how they were there. And suddenly I found this Jimmy Corrigan over there, and I found this beautiful object with such a complex and sophisticated language that somehow connected with a lot of the things that we read here, like when we were little, like Tintin, but it was crossed with architecture, it was crossed with infographics, with design, with graphic design, and it was clear that it was somebody inventing a new language for comics, or reinvented, or connecting with something old to do something new. And I normally dream this kind of stuff. I mean, I would dream that I find some kind of weird comic, and when I wake up, it's not there. And that night, I went to bed, and when I woke up, the dinosaur was still there. The Chris Ware was still there.
Wow.
So, do you dream with comics somehow? Do you dream in the shape of comics?
Gosh, that's like the nicest thing anybody's ever said on a stage. Thank you. I mean, in my most arrogant moments when I was drawing stuff, I would imagine some scenario, maybe somebody will find this after I'm dead, and they'll think, oh, it's, but those are the thoughts that you should push aside when you're working. So thank you very much. So
one of the things that shocked me when I discovered your work is that when I woke up, I saw that the book was still there. I was trying to find a name, and I was trying to find who did this, no? Who's the girl or the guy who did this. And I found on the side of the book, upside down, a little written word that said, by Mr. F.C. Ware. So you've always been hiding. So sometimes I found that you've always been hiding your work or your name inside your work. Why is that? I mean, what is that relationship between?
I just didn't want it to be about me necessarily. I didn't want my name big on it, though I just realized in this there's a poster I did for an exhibition with my name really big, which makes me feel uncomfortable. But I think it's arrogant enough to just draw. I mean, you can tell whose it is. It doesn't really matter that much. I don't know. I noticed too that early when I was doing comics, if I signed the page, it was like it provided an ending to the strip that didn't necessarily deserve. It was like if you put a signature at the end, it made an easy ending to the strip, and I didn't want that there. It felt wrong somehow. I didn't want the reader to think about that, so I wanted to kind of vanish into the work. So, but I wanted to say, if you have a dream about having like an amazing comic, or like hearing beautiful music, because has everybody had that dream where you have a dream that you've seen the most beautiful painting, or heard this beautiful music, and then you wake up and you're like, oh, it was just a dream. But then you realize, like, wait, I actually dreamed that. I made that up myself, and I made the painting in my mind. I made the music in my mind. To me, that indicates that it's pretty clear we all have the potential to do that ourselves, whether we devote our lives to it or not. So that's actually kind of buried in Building Stories. There's one page that's about that, because I think we all have that potential. Whether we realize it physically or not, we're doing that in our minds. We're kind of creating art when we sleep and when we live our lives. So.
Well, yesterday you talked about, particularly now, this your diary, and it impressed me how you said that how the diary or the fact of doing this diary every day push you into building comics. I wouldn't expect that. How a diary or trying to think push you into this architectural structure. So that really surprised me.
Either you never know what's going to happen, when you're working on something, or how it's going to affect what you do. So I mean, that's just why you do it, I think. So, how many cartoonists are in here? Can we see hands? Come on, you can do higher than that. It's not embarrassing. Look at that. Hey, that's pretty good. Wow. All right. That makes me feel better. That's good.
Quite a good bunch.
That's good. So we can talk about drawing comics if we want to. Thank you for coming. So.
And you've talked a lot of times now how comics are somehow bringing time back to space, trying to somehow compress those 4 dimensions into 2. And that the way that you think is connected to your past. I mean, can you?
I sort of think that they can represent or kind of try to get very slightly at those structures that structure our lives and our impulses and our feelings that we can't see, that we sort of follow through, that we are unconscious of trailing through, like the way that our lives are interweaving right now, but then we'll separate and go far apart. It's sort of like the universe is drawing a picture of our lives, and comics can kind of get at that very subtly in the page compositions if you pay attention to what you're thinking and what you're doing, and you let things happen naturally on the page. If you try to structure it too much, it doesn't work because you can sense that it's false. But if you just allow your natural inclination and your natural feelings and your interests to structure a story, strange things happen on the page, I think, at least in my own case. So that's why I asked how many cartoonists were here, because I know that as artists, we're sometimes told that we should come up with an idea first and then execute it. Or as writers, we're supposed to plan ahead. And I don't think that's what art is about at all. It's trying to allow for something that's inside of you to come out in the most natural way possible, whether that's looking at something and painting it, or writing something, or drawing a comic strip, or creating music. So that's not your question at all. I'm sorry.
Well, it's fun because you also said that how comics are a way to connect with your memory, with your past. And I was also thinking how drawing in architecture somehow is projecting to the future. No? And I thought it was nice to be able to use this mechanism that somehow makes you control time with so much power. No?
Weirdest thing is that I have actually written things that then happened later. And I'm not saying like, oh, I have a secret power or something like that. It's only happened 2 or 3 times. And it could just be coincidence. But I think it was in John Updike's biography, where he just kind of as an aside, he's like, oh, and then there's that weird thing that novelists do where they predict things that actually happen later. And I'm like, wait, what? You know, and then he just, doesn't address it. But I think writers sometimes get into a strange mode of feeling something that's not graspable and are able to somehow put that into a story, and they can sense something. Vladimir Nabokov actually really believed this. He got very into studying dreams because he believed that they could predict the future. And then finally he was like, that's bullshit. It doesn't really work. But I don't know. Now we sound like theosophists or something up here, but that's not the intention. I just think that art can get at things sometimes that are invisible and difficult to grasp otherwise, other than, the structures I'm talking about, but also just caring about other people and learning to feel for it and through other people too. So,
talking about feeling through other people, one of the things that impressed me a lot about that Jimmy Corrigan book is how you hidden at the end of the book in this corrigenda or this big apology that you write. You talk about how the size of the book, first you say that the 4 or 5 hours that you spend reading the book are more or less the 4 or 5 hours that you spend when you're your father, even in telephone calls. And then you say that your last interaction was having his ashes in a box that was more or less the same size and weight as the book. So that shocks the reader, because suddenly you are having a very physical connection with you. And somehow I think it's very beautiful how you, years later, kind of to compensate maybe, made us hold your daughter in building stories, no? That baby in real size. No? So I've never seen anybody else using comics as in that sculptoric way, if you can say that.
There's actually a fair number of Sunday pages from the 1910s through the 1930s that try to get at a strange kind of physicality sometimes, or draw a face really big so that it was surprising to the reader. So I think there were cartoonists experimenting with it, but that particular size of page, I knew I was the size of a child, and I wanted it to be about holding a child and what it felt like to hold a child, because when I was younger and I hadn't had a daughter yet, I was really worried that I would be a bad dad because I didn't know my dad, and I worried that having not known my dad that I might be not an effective parent. But then when my wife and I had her daughter, or I should say my wife had her daughter, I did very little in terms of effort. It completely changed my life and made my life, it made it suddenly great. So. And I tried to get at that a little bit in that particular strip. So,
What a beautiful story.
Oh, well, that's nice of you to say. I don't know, but
Enrique is the more intelligent questions. I am the silly ones, okay?
Come on.
This is our our team, okay? So, I was wondering, when you are in the college, okay, doing these comic strips, and this young Chris Ware doing his comics, and how Art Spiegelman invites you to collaborate to Raw. How do you feel, or how was this thing? How happened?
I was doing comic strips in the student newspaper when I was in college, and again, for the cartoonists in the audience, you should never underestimate the power of a deadline. It's really a useful tool to help you get past your self-doubts and to put something on the page. No matter what it is, it doesn't matter. You just realize, I got to do something. And sometimes it made me do completely terrible work that I was embarrassed by and I hope nobody would ever see. Or sometimes it would make me come up with something that I thought, actually, this is better than what I was thinking. And sometimes the strip that I thought was the worst thing, somebody would come up and say, oh, that was the best thing you've ever done. You know, I was like, but I took 10 minutes on it, you know. So you can never judge these things. But I was doing strips for the paper. Art Spiegelman's Mouse had just come out and was reviewed by, you know, an undergraduate or something. And the clipping service at the publisher that used to exist, there were people who would clip out newspaper reviews of books and mail them to the authors before the internet, just for the young people in the audience here. And on the back then of Art's review was part of a terrible comic strip that I'd drawn. And he, from that, found out who I was and got my phone number and called me and told me that he thought it looked interesting. And at that point in my life, Art was, I'd been studying Mouse, I'd been reading Raw magazine. He was like, it was like getting a call from, I don't know, Mick Jagger or something. So, and I didn't actually believe it was him.
Do you remember where you was, or what you was doing, or do you remember the moment?
Oh yeah, I mean, I thought it was my friend John Keane, the cartoonist I mentioned earlier, just messing with me. I just thought, you know, it was like a lie, that it wasn't actually Art, but it was actually Art. And then we got to be friends, and we have been ever since. But he's a very generous guy, and he was editing Raw at the time and looking for younger artists. I did not feel ready. I still never felt ready to appear in Raw, because so much of what I did was based on the other artists I was ripping off. So, but it's, you know, cartoonists tend to be pretty nice to each other. I think we realize that we're easily wounded people, you know, and that we like to sit by ourselves and in rooms. So there's something called avoidant personality disorder, which I looked up online, which apparently is a state that I suffer, which is something to do with, like, you don't want to be around other people, you're afraid what they're going to say about you, and you tend to choose jobs that encourage isolation. So I thought, oh, that's all the cartoonists I know. So.
Okay, talking more about the creativity process. I would like to, I see that one of your favorite books are Moby Dick, Ulysses, and War and Peace, so you like the very heavy literature. So I would like to know how you write your own stories. You first sit in your PC or a Mac and start to write, or you have a notebook where you write things? How I start a project?
I keep notes, but as I said before, I don't believe in the write before and then draw after. I tried that for a while as a young cartoonist, and everything I did was it just looked like corpses on a page. It didn't feel real. It felt illustrated. And I finally just gave up, and I started drawing directly in ink on the page, not knowing what was going to happen. And all of a sudden, the stories and the characters came to life in a way that I never would have expected.
Nothing? You don't write nothing before?
I might write a few notes, but almost always they never end up in the story. It's just sort of an excuse to get going, because it's so hard for me to get started. But sometimes they'll come in, but most of the time not. I might have an idea, oh, this might happen at a certain point, but every idea I have, by the time I sit down and actually start drawing, say, a corner of a room or a character, recently I've started been drawing a character who is somebody who was a very good friend of mine in the 1990s and who introduced my wife and I to each other, who died shortly thereafter in a bike accident. She was a wonderful painter. And so bringing her to life on the page has suggested all sorts of different things I never, ever could have planned otherwise. It's much better to just let those things happen as you work and let the drawings tell you what to do. Because
but how do you, forgive me if I am very insist, but I can imagine. But how do you start to composing the page? Or
just compose themselves. I mean, it's like life, you know.
I
It's
love
like
that.
asking, like, no, but I mean, how do you live your life? You know, like if you get to the point, well, I walk, I put one foot, and then maybe I'll plan to put that foot next. You know, you'd go crazy. You just kind of have to go with it and hope for the best, you know. And it's anything that happens on the page as I'm drawing is always better than the things that I plan. It's all up here. I mean, everybody's brain is very organized, that we have language that has structured our brain. If you just let that go on the page, regardless of what you do, whether you're a cartoonist or an artist or a painter or a musician, if you just let that go, it will come out on the page fine. I know that sounds weird for artwork that looks like it was drawn by a constipated, insane person, but I'm also trying to make it as clear as possible, so...
How did you come up with the idea of integrating the text in such a strong way? Because you are drawing, but I think something that is very attractive from the very first beginning, no? The way you use that, and then now later, no? That kind of very aggressive use of the text.
I don't know actually how I came. It worked one day. I thought I just needed something to get from here to here in a way that reflected how I think about things, because that's how you can jump in your mind from you can think about when you were a little kid to yesterday to when you're going to be old, all within the period of 10 seconds in your mind, and I wanted to try to get that on the page. So, and using those words was one way to kind of get at it. So,
I would like to know how what writers are your inspiration, or you like the most, or for your own stories.
So these are questions I dread because I always leave people out that I think later, oh my God, how could I not have mentioned that writer? But certainly the ones you mentioned, Tolstoy, Proust, Joyce, Herman Melville, Gustave Flaubert, John Updike, contemporary Zadie Smith, Dave Eggers, Jonathan Franzen. People who try to get at what it feels like to be alive. It's pretty straightforward, you know. And I really think the 19th century writers in many ways were on that much more direct and sensible and understandable way of writing that to me is not maybe so clear anymore. I think maybe some writers like Jonathan Franzen and Zadie Smith have looked back as well and thought, well, you know, those writers were really good. So, and Tolstoy's never been bettered. I mean, you know, he's like the greatest writer who ever lived, except for James Joyce. It's hard to say, you know, I don't know, but.
Okay, very.
Cervantes, if we want to pick a Spanish writer, the inventor of the modern novel. I mean, you know, he's...
Stephen King, or something more light?
Yeah, well, no, that is light. I mean, most of these books are actually really funny and entertaining. There's a reason why they're works of classic... I've been reading off and on now for a year Alessandro Manzoni's I Promessi Sposi, I think it is. It's an Italian novel that every Italian school child has to read, and they all hate it, but it's really good. There's all sorts of experiments in it where he's trying to get into the minds of the characters, and very funny and very peculiar, and gets at the uncomfortable manipulations that people make to try to find what they ever think they're going after. You know, it's really a great book. Very, very thoughtful. I'm surprised how good it is. So you never know, you know, and to know that it was written in the 1820s, 1830s it's really heartening to be able to think like, wow, this is how people felt back then. It's such a strange sensation to get in the mind of somebody who lived 200 years ago and wrote something. And he wrote the book too with this, making fun of the florid language that was popular at the time, and then just say, okay, forget that. We're just going to tell you how it happened, you know, in that tone. And it's very, you can't stop turning the pages. Sorry.
So also about influences, I've seen you these days also taking pictures, and I always wonder what your relationship is with photography. You know, how you use it as reference, you use it. So I've seen that you have a particular relationship in your day-to-day basis, no? That you don't see particularly on your work, or maybe later.
I use photos a lot, actually, when I'm drawing, sometimes for reference, or sometimes just as a reminder of something that I wanted to use, and then I'll look at the photo and there might be something in there that'll suggest a story or something. But most of the time I'm just taking short movies. I do it without thinking. Like, I just think if something in my brain says take a short movie, I'll do it, which I didn't plan on that. I just saw everybody clapping. It made me so happy. I thought, oh, when I'm old, I can watch this again and it'll make me feel like I'd done something with my life. So I made a short, and then I just edit them together without thinking about it later in the year. And then weird connections happening. It's the same kind of thing. Like, actually, images line up in strange ways that I can't predict, but show that there was some odd organization happening. So you should try it. It's kind of strange, actually. So I don't know. It's mostly a way of remembering things. So
also the way that you treat image, the way that you draw, I see. I mean, you have always different levels of abstraction, but lately you're adding even more realistic details. No, sometimes you make give the detail of a banana in a certain frame, and just that. And I mean, the more recent Chris Ware, I've seen even faces that are more detailed than they were in Jimmy Corrigan. No, so I've seen you playing more actively at that change of register, no, with the abstraction.
it's more to get at a sense of moments in experience where something becomes very, or somebody becomes vulnerable to the world around them. You know, moments where you might talk to someone and they say something very moving or penetrating. I've noticed that you see them a little bit better than you otherwise might not, or reality kind of breaks through. We spend most of our lives navigating the world by superimposing these abbreviations on the world, which is the core of comics. That's what comics is about bottle, chair, shoe. It's not just the words themselves. That actually affects the way we see the world as adults. We stop experiencing the world that we did when we were children, and time seemed to go on forever, and you could look at grass or a rock for a very long time, and you know, the afternoon would seem to last forever. As adults, language takes over and abbreviates experience, and it makes life more difficult. We spend a lot more time thinking about the past and worrying about the future. So comics kind of harnesses that as a language and abbreviates it and then turns it back into something that kind of resembles experience, if that makes sense. So, because we really are creatures of language. That's how we structure our memories and our experiences. So.
One of the things that I've seen you also playing with comics is how you play with the format. No? You've made comics for the screen, for the iPad, thinking about like a non-directional reading. Also, you've done, I think, probably the smallest comic I have ever seen on the side of the Augmented Novelty, in the side of the cover, and probably one of the biggest too, the facade for Valencia 826. So, how do you feel about playing with those formats?
Thank you for noticing. I just try to make it interesting. That's all, for the viewer or the reader. You know, when I was younger, comics were a very standard format, and I thought, why does that have to be that way? Like, it should suit the story. You should make it a different size. Like, it's fun to read a little tiny book, or it's fun to have a giant page that fills your visual field. So it seemed ridiculous to me that everything should be the same size. So it's a physical object that the reader interacts with in a very personal way. It's almost always in your lap, which is kind of strange when you think about it. And it's something that you can put down and pick up again, or put other things on top of, and then find later and be like, why did I buy this book? I don't want this anymore. And then throw it away or keep it and treasure it. It's a very affordable form of art that I greatly like.
And did going into those formats change somehow the way you work in other formats? I get the impression that, for example, the piece you did for the New Yorker that was digital somehow changed the way that you work with other pages. Is that true?
Sort of. It really drives me crazy because so many magazines now, they're like, just make it work on the iPhone. And I'm like, I don't want to make it work on the iPhone. Fuck the iPhone. You know, I want it to be on a large piece of paper where you get like you're looking out at the world, but they all want it to be scrollable. So I've done a couple where it's both scrollable and works on a page, but I don't know. It's kind of depressing to me because the power in comics to me is the page, not the panel. And an iPhone just makes it the panel, so. I don't know. It's good for reading the news, not so good for... But a lot of people do great comics on the iPhone, and they're, you know, wildly successful, so what do I know? I'm old, I guess, so... Some of the cartoonists in here probably do comics on the iPhone, right? Any hands? iPhone comics? Nobody wants to admit to it. Okay.
Well, I mean, talking about formats, I also wanted, I have a very egoistic, I'm very interested in knowing this because you've always been, as long as I know, at least 3 or 4 times, an exhibition designer. No? And also we are in a museum and you made that exercise of occupating the space with some content, no? The exhibition you did about Sullivan, or the Garrick, or even the story of the Chicago comics. How do you feel making that jump, becoming an exhibition designer? Is it very different from when you work in your pages for comics, or do you think it's a complete detached work?
It's actually not dissimilar to designing a book, but the great thing is that you can see the book all at once, and you can put a page very far away or very close up, and you can see how seeing them in the same visual field will line up, especially in architecture, where my friend and I were trying to make it clear that a particular Louis Sullivan, who was basically the progenitor of what we now think of as modern architecture, had done before in a couple of other buildings. So I lined it up so that when you stood a certain way, they would kind of merge together in the distance and the thing. You know, that's the only you can do that in space. It's hard to do in a book. But it's really not, it's not my job. I just tried it, and I hoped it wouldn't be terrible, and I guess it worked. I don't know. So it was fun to do. There's a nice way it's a nice way to put the physical world and photographs together on the wall on a limited budget. So, but it's not my thing necessarily. I find it compelling as a cartoonist to try to create a way to make comics work on the wall of a museum, because there's very few cartoonists whose work actually hold up on a wall. Gary Panter is the best of them. George Harriman would be up there. Other cartoonists, who are great cartoonists like Charles Schultz, you put 10 of his originals up, it gets pretty dry. And my stuff gets really dry too. So in a way, it's better to just see 1 or 2, I think. So, and then show other things, other images and other ephemera or whatever else might work. And exhibition I did about Gasoline Alley, I used lots and lots of family photos and tried to make them life-size so you felt like you were walking into them. And you could see then in the pages that Frank King did, which was the first autobiographical comic strip. It was a 50-year-long novel that he wrote about what it was like to live with the child that he no longer had, who had been sent away to school, which is a very moving thing to try. And every day in the strip, the characters got 1 day older. So by the time that he stopped working on it, all the characters had grown up and had children of their own. It's a very beautiful idea, especially to do it on an ephemeral medium of newsprint. So, but I think I lost your question again. I'm sorry. Cartoonist is crazy. Sorry.
Talking about the relationship between comic and that's right with me. Between comics and exhibitions and museums, which place do you think should comic occupy in museums? And what are the future challenges for museums to bring or to spread out the comic for the public?
Well, they should be in the bookstore first. And then beyond that, I think if museums are actually willing to show comic art, just make it fun, because the fun thing about comics is that it's a lot of different things going on all at once. And try to give the reader more than they expect and the viewer more than they expect. And the hard part is museums are for looking, they're not for reading. So it's very difficult to find a way to make something that is meant specifically for reading, with the exception of some of the youngest cartoonists who've been very experimental in dealing more with how comics work as visual work. And their work obviously works better in a museum than, say, mine and my generation. So I don't know. I mean, but certainly it's a wonderfully reassuring thing to cartoonists to be taken seriously. And that seems to only happen in Europe. Very occasionally it happens in the United States. The Museum of Contemporary Art of Chicago did a show about contemporary cartooning, and the Whitney included me, and there was a traveling show 10, 15 years ago, even longer than that, I guess now, about comics. So it helps legitimize and make it clear that, you know, there are some very, you know, thoughtful cartoonists out there, I hope.
Talking about the fact that the comic is a device made to be read, not to be looked at in an exhibition. Which other alternatives do you think have the museums to link comic and displays to bring her to their visitors?
One of the curators for the museum in Barcelona, who I just met today, Jordi, whose last name I've forgotten because he wrote it down. I've completely don't have my phone handy to look it up here, but he curated a show of 9 young cartoonists and allowed them to try to find a way to put comics into a museum space, a new way of organizing space on the wall and in space itself, which I think is such a wonderful idea. That's pretty much the most interesting thing I've heard, or sort of great idea, especially for young cartoonists whose minds are probably quite a bit more flexible than mine is at this point, to try to come up with new ideas like that. So next year also the Pompidou is doing a survey of the history of comics that will close their museum I think in the fall of that year. So that'll be a big show of comics as well. So, which is nice. So it makes us cartoonists feel not so sad.
We live in a very fast moment. We live in internet, seeing reels, seeing videos, constantly images. But you do your comics very slowly. And
sorry.
No, I think it's interesting to take the creativity thing more slowly than these times that we are always doing doing the things very fast, drawing fast. The editors want a book in a year, and you spend your time to do your work. How do you continue the comic all this year? You don't get tired? You don't want to take the comic in the trash? How do you do it?
It's well, first of all, I want to say that's Jordi Costa, who was the curator at the Barcelona Museum, who created that show for the 9 cartoonists. Just wanted to get that on there. Sorry about that. But I just get bored really easily, and so I switch between different stories. So you can only work so fast, you know. I think people assume that it takes cartoonists about as long to draw a page as it does to read one, which is not true at all for those of you out there who've drawn comics. You will find quickly that it takes a really long time to make a page work, sometimes several days. But that's good, because you're putting in a lot of careful thought and condensation. It's an art of condensing experience and reality onto a page. Some cartoonists work faster, some cartoonists work slower. I just happen to work about that fast, so I can't help it, you know? I mean, I do my diary, obviously, at a certain rate, because if I don't, I'm in big trouble. The diary is a very good thing, because it's something you can always fall behind on and never get ahead on. So that's actually a good lesson to learn. So I do that every morning as a way to try to keep, in practice, I guess. So, but
it makes sense that you switch the stories. No, you take your time, and then 2 weeks later, come back to that page and you create new things. That is the way that you create?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that okay? I don't know.
I understand now. No, because before I don't understand that you maybe put your pages in a, ¿cómo se dice cajón?
In the box.
In a box,
drawer.
and then take your time and then come back and continue. So
Sometimes, yeah. I've got a bunch of pages now that I've just penciled, waiting to be inked, which is cartoonist talk. That means most cartoonists draw their work in pencil first, and then ink it using a brush or a pen and lamp black, that black stuff that used to come in jars. Now it comes on an iPad for most of the younger cartoonists. But I still work in the old-fashioned way on paper. And I found that if I'm in a certain frame of mind, it's better to just keep drawing the stuff in pencil and then have it to ink when I'm really sad and depressed, so then I can just ink because it doesn't require as much thinking. And I can talk on the phone, too, when I'm inking, so that's nice.
You listen podcast or something, or music, or what do you do?
Sometimes I listen to books on tape or talk on the phone. So, but that's...
So you call a friend and...
I've got a friend. Yes, I have a friend.
You have friends?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
One friend.
So, yeah. You don't do that?
Well, so I always listen true crime. I love true crimes.
You listen to what?
True crimes.
True crime.
Yes,
okay.
assassination, or maybe the Roman Empire sometimes, podcasts about the Roman Empire.
The best true crime of all, the Roman Empire.
Roman Empire. Yes, or something, mostly podcast, because I like to have someone talk while I am inking.
And you like the murder part, or you?
I love it.
Oh, you do?
I love it. Yes, and I listen. No one, 4 or 5. I am always yes.
That's interesting. Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
I love true crime. I think it's like you put your head in another thing while you are doing something very technical. No, you are doing your inks and you are. Very focused, and you are listening to something that puts you in another dimension.
Right.
I think I love that when I am inking. I love that. I think it's my favorite part. What is your favorite part?
I just listen to books on tape or recorded, audio books. So I've noticed that when I'm inking,
audiobooks.
I've noticed that when I'm inking, I get really angry really fast, and I'll start thinking about kids in 3rd and 4th grade who made me really mad.
Okay.
And I'll replay that, and I'll think, what am I doing? And so that's when I'll call my friends, because then I'll just that gets rid of that.
Okay.
So do you do that when you're?
Well, I hate perspectives.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that is and I think I hate it, but I love it. I don't know if you feel. Well, you are like a plotter. You are so perfect.
I just use a ruler.
No, man. Okay. I have a lot of rulers, and I don't do the same as you. I don't know.
I actually make that sound too. It's
but I think I get angry when I am doing some sketch and some part of the a character, and I am doing it and I can't do it, and I do it again, and when I was younger I continue, but now I say, okay, I will go to call my friend Anna and take a beer or something and have a nice time, and then come back and do it again.
It's healthy.
I don't call anyone. I go to drink alcohol.
True crime, yeah. The cartoonist Charles Schultz, who drew Peanuts again, who I mentioned earlier, he kept all his high school yearbooks, and they've been printed, but I visited his studio shortly after he died. His widow invited myself and a book editor and a couple other people there, and she let us just look at stuff, and I pulled one of his yearbooks off the shelf, and over the pictures of his classmates from 50 years before, cancer, dead. He was in that world. He was very much thinking still about the people that he was in school with as a kid. So, and I saw that, I thought, uh-oh, you know, so I don't know, maybe it's you don't seem to have that problem, so that's good. I've noticed the younger generation is much more mentally healthy, it seems like, than, you know.
Really?
Yeah. It's
I think my psychologist buy with my money 2 houses.
Okay. That's funny. Wow. All right. Anyway, sorry. Okay. I sure hope this is a free talk. So, anyway.
Talking about school and about, I mean, you are reflected as a character inside Rusty Brown, also as a teacher in middle school, I don't know, in the high school.
Right.
It's like an art teacher, so somehow it's like an alternative Jew. And at the same time, you studied in a formal art school, and we are in an art museum, and I consider you to be a contemporary artist, but what is your relation with that work? I mean, how do you feel in between that teaching as a professor in high school or being as a student in art school, being an artist in front of this contemporary world?
Well, the short answer is that in that book, I needed a character who would be an asshole, and I thought, I'll do it. You know, I'm here. I just figured it would be responsible of me to be that person. So, but that chapter hasn't been written or drawn yet. The longer answer is that in my life, the art teachers I've had have been some of the most inspiring and wonderful people I've ever met. From the time I was a little kid to the time I was in art school, but also in some cases maybe not so inspiring. In fact, some of them were kind of mean-spirited, and the things that they would say would really lodge in my memory and kind of hurt my feelings. But that's okay. They're teachers, you know, they're all different people. But from the time I was a little kid, I remember one art teacher in that art room that I drew there just came up to me when I was drawing a picture of, I think it was a picture of him actually holding an apple. And he said, "That's a really great drawing you did, Chris." And it was the best moment just to have somebody say that. Just to say, that's a really nice thing that you did, you know, third grader or however old I was. And it meant so much to me. And I know that at that moment, too, I thought, oh, maybe I could do this. And I felt myself rise up a little bit. That's all anybody needs who's creative, is just to hear like, oh, that's nice. And the best thing an art teacher ever said to me was, when somebody says something to you that hurts your feelings and makes you feel terrible about something you've done, don't let it bother you, because all that means is that it got to them and it really bothered them. So you know you did something that they paid attention to. And I thought, that's great, thank you. So, but some of my art teachers became some of my very best friends, and they meant a lot to me. So. But the art teacher that I play in the book is not necessarily, and it's not me. I just drew me because I thought it was kind of funny. So.
What about the contemporary art? I mean, how do you feel inside of that system, to call it somehow?
I don't know. I don't think of myself necessarily that way. I guess I've been in art museums, so maybe I am kind of I'm an artist, sort of, and I'm alive, so I'm contemporary, but I'm not. And I've been in the Whitney Biennial, like I mentioned, and I've been in various things. But I don't know. I studied painting and sculpture, but I stopped making artwork for walls, and I started making artwork for books that can hang on the wall, but it's not intended necessarily for the wall. I started making a few things again that are intended for showing in a gallery, though, and I'm doing more of that. But I feel very nervous. I have a lot of the voices in my head of when I sit down to draw or paint. I keep hearing voices saying, "You're so terrible. You should just quit. Why are you even trying?" You know, and I think, okay, I have to just get past that and just try to do it. But I hear that more when I'm trying to paint and not draw. So, and I should mention, one of the very greatest painters, in my opinion, alive, is a Spanish painter named Felix de la Concha. He lives in Madrid. He's such an incredible artist. He sees the world more clearly than I think most other contemporary humans do, and you guys are lucky to have him living here. I don't know if anybody's familiar with him. He has a website. You can look him up. I think he's just such a fantastic artist, and he's one of my great friends. He's the only friend I have here in Madrid, but I just wanted to mention him because I love his work so much. So,
Do you have the opportunity to know some cartoonists that you were your mentor or you were very fan of its work or something?
yeah, all of them. I mean, I grew up just loving comics and cartooning. I didn't get to meet Charles Schulz. I mean, he died, but
You meet him?
I didn't. No, I didn't. I got to meet his wife, and I've corresponded with her over the years. But I mean, every cartoonist I've met, Charles Burns and Gary Panter, Art Spiegelman and Robert Crumb, Dane Klaus, they've all been heroes of mine. So when I first met them, I was like, I couldn't believe that I was sitting next to them.
But I mean some of the older school that.
Not really. I mean, no, because they're mostly not alive anymore. So they all
When you're
died.
younger or something like that.
Well, they all, like, the newspaper cartoonists died a long time ago. So there was a cartoonist who lived down the street from me when I was a little kid named Hank Barrow. And he really was an amazing draftsman. He could draw with a brush. He was completely bald, and he had like a handlebar mustache and this gravelly voice. And he had a spin-it piano, and I would go there to practice the piano because I was taking piano lessons. And he and his wife would let me come into their house. It smelled like cigarettes, carpeting, and alcohol. And I would practice piano, and he'd say, "Hey, Chris, come on in. How you doing?" And he would eventually then, I'd sit down next to him, and I'd say, "Can you draw a superhero?" And he's like, "Oh, all right, whatever. Let's see what we can do." And he'd like draw this amazing drawing with a loose brush of, just some funny picture of like a superhero or whatever. And it was so amazing just to watch him draw. And he had his drawing table upstairs. And I realized now I have that life, so that I don't drink and I don't smoke. But he was such a wonderful guy. So my grandfather had hired him many years before for the newspaper as the editor of the newspaper. But he's a fantastic artist. So.
What about the other way around? No, because a lot of cartoonists say that when you arrive, you were a game changer, and a lot of things needed to be done differently, or your influence somehow was like a big weight, and you can totally, from the outside, see your influence in so many people. Maybe you're too humble to answer this, but how do you feel? Do you actually see your influence or what you have done in the area, or you can tell when somebody's kind of following you, or I mean, how it makes you feel?
I can see it sometimes, and it's always flattering to see that somebody's noticed or, trying something, because I did the same thing. I look at my stuff, I see Charles Burns and Dan and even Gary Panter and Linda Berry. It's all there. We all influence each other. So more than anything, I've just tried to do everything I can for the young artists that I really think are great or admire. I'll do anything I can to help any young cartoonist who's doing honest stuff about what it feels like to be alive or interesting work. I try to help everyone I possibly can, because there's not that many of us, and it's a difficult, very, very hard to make a living at, almost impossible. I never thought I'd be able to do it. I never even entertained the thought. I still don't know how I've actually figured out how to. It wasn't a plan, it just happened. So, but there's so many great young cartoonists, and I'll try to help them any way I can by talking to editors or just mentioning their work or whatever, because it's interesting. It's the work I like, so. And it inspires me to see what they're doing, especially the youngest cartoonists who I mentioned earlier are doing work that's more towards the art end of the spectrum. Rather than the writing end, and they do something I know I can't do. When I read their work, I get a very different feeling than from what I get when I read my stuff, and I just feel incapable of doing what they're doing, work that's more on the surface and about being seen rather than read. So, and I greatly admire that, and I just think it's great to know that comics can support such a wide variety of experimentation and expression. Who would have thought it was possible? So. Comics can communicate the complete spectrum of human emotion. 35 years ago, I don't know if I could have said that because I wasn't sure, but it's quite clear that they can. So that's kind of interesting, I think, and amazing. So, but anyway, I bet everybody wants to go home now. So.
No, they don't want, because if we have a little bit of time, if someone from the public want to ask something. Yeah, I think I must borrow the microphone for the...
I'm going to sit here and listen to some jams. I don't know how this works.
Hi.
This is supposedly a translate.
I can speak a question in English.
Okay, great.
Hi, Chris, you might not remember me, but I worked with you in 2005. So when I was working as a designer for the New York Times. And I remember when I was a designer there that I was asked to start the funny pages, that section, that we started hiring cartoonists like you to do the funny pages, like a page a week. And you did building stories there. And I remember that we asked many illustrators cartoonists to work with us, like Art Spiegelman and Adrian Tomini and Daniel Close even. And they didn't want to do the piece for us. But you were the one that said yes, and you were the first one to do it.
Thank God I said yes.
And I was the one in charge of asking you every week for the piece.
Right. So wait, what's the question?
The question is, no, I'm telling you that I was the designer assigning you the piece every week. And the question I have now, after many years, is if you regret taking that assignment.
Oh my God, no, are you kidding?
And how hard it was, because I remember you expressing frustration of having to commit to a page every week.
No, it was great.
And if that changed the way you approach a comic piece?
No, it was great, thank you. So wait, what was your name?
Guillermo.
Okay, yeah, we talked on the phone, right?
Yeah, a lot of times.
We didn't?
I was always after you.
You were in the
had to send me a
background
piece.
controlling everything, right?
Exactly.
Making my life better. No, it was great. I mean, as I mentioned...
And the question is how different it is from completing a book from beginning to end, as opposed to finish up a page every week, because you had to probably have a different process for that, right?
No, I mean, that went back to what I did when I was a student. I would do either a daily strip, drawing a strip a day. Frequently when I was in class, I would have my ink bottle and paper, and I would be trying to take notes in biology class in college and draw my strip at the same time. And then I switched to a weekly strip, which was a little bit easier. And I'd gotten away from that after I quit doing it in the weekly newspaper in Chicago. So to then be able to do it for the New York Times was like, this is, you know, and especially to be in a venue, the New York Times Magazine, where I knew that a lot of people were going to see it. It was very nerve-wracking, only in that I was worried how people might react to it. But no, you changed so many people's lives. I don't think you realize that. Like, my daughter had just been born, and when I was working on those strips, I would wait for her to fall asleep, so I'd have like 27 minutes to work on those strips. And it was great because it really made me pay attention to how precious time is, literally, to work on things. You helped Seth buy a house, the cartoonist Seth in Canada. When you hired him to do that, I know
that was right after you.
I'm sorry?
It was right after you, right?
Yeah, okay. And Jaime Hernandez was thrilled to do it, and I know Dan Klaus, I mean, he turned his strip into a book. That was like this magical moment in newspaper publishing that I'm so happy to have been a part of. So, but I didn't know that you asked Art, and he said no. I'm so glad.
Yes, actually, we asked so many cartoonists before you, and you were we didn't know what to do, and you said yes, and it was amazing. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I was really worried that, because there's a lot of dirty stuff in my strip, and I was worried it wouldn't fly, but it actually somehow made it through the censors. So, thank you. It's so nice to meet you far on a stage like this. So, no, you really changed so many cartoonists' lives with that. So it's like a game. Hello, how are you?
Okay, fine. I would like to know what's your relation with animation. As you started with Queen the Mouse, and then I've seen you're publishing like little flip books, and you build a mutoscope. How do you integrate the animation in your work?
So you're asking about animation?
Yes.
Okay. I find it very hard and arduous and time-consuming and depressing to do. But I like the result. My friend John Kuramoto is a genius. He started out working as a press correction guy at a printing press, and he taught himself to do animation, and he and I have collaborated on all of the animation. A lot of what you're seeing there is John's genius for gesture and rhythm, like a lot of the movements that the characters make are things that he puts in. He's very sensitive to those. I do the overall layouts, the drawings, the scripts, and all that stuff, and we work together on it. And if there's something that's actually hand-drawn animated, I will do that myself. But it takes forever. I mean, sometimes I'll think like the greatest animation, like the Warner Brothers stuff from the war years, I think like, how did people even react to that stuff? Because you think about these drawings that are moving and breathing life. It's so incredible. And yet it's considered this kind of low art, but the sort of intelligence that had to go into that to make it work is just so astonishing, but so tiring. It's so labor intensive. I don't know how anyone ever did it, so. But I tried a little bit when I was in art school. I made some installations, sculptures with animation, projecting animated films that I'd drawn onto sculptures and stuff as experiments. So it was a different way of thinking about time and human, human incorporeality, I think. So are you an animator?
Yes.
I guess that. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You're just a shadowy form. I can only see the outlines. So your friends are pointing. So yes. Well, nice to meet you. So.
Hi.
Hi.
You told us a lot about your work, your process, and I would also like to know your relationship with other cartoonists, more like the cartoonists in this underground wave, because recently Joe Matt passed away, sadly, and I wanted to know what is your relationship with them, or if you have any fun story about them or something.
Sure, yeah. The cartoonist Joe Matt was 60 years old. He did a book called Peep Show that was one of the more, if not the most revealing comic book and cartoonist of his generation. Very embarrassing stories, and we all kind of sat up and took notice when his books started being published. And he was a hero of mine artistically, and best friends with Seth and Chester Brown in Toronto, who I also know. Seth is one of my very favorite artists on earth and one of my very great friends. I mean, all of us cartoonists are sort of friends in a way to one degree or another. We all talk to each other in varying degrees. I talked to Richard McGuire, the author of Here, fairly regularly. Charles Burns I talk to very regularly. Art Spiegelman as well. My friend Ivan Brunetti, who was actually born in Italy and moved to the United States when he was 8 years old, I've been going to dinner with every Sunday now for something like 30 years, I think. So he's a very close friend. We all know each other, and we all pay attention to each other's work and correspond. So, I mean, there's lots of stories I could tell, but probably none of them in an auditorium. So, I only met Joe a few times. He toured me through his room in Toronto when he was still living there, when I went there for Seth's wedding, and he showed me his Gasoline Alley collection and more embarrassing things that I won't mention here. And I actually filmed all of it, but then the tape was in our video camera that was stolen out of a train shortly thereafter. So it was, I still regret that so much. But yeah, there's very little I could say about Joe right now that would be polite with the children in the room. So, but he was a fantastic artist who I miss greatly. I'm going to Toronto next week, actually, to go to his memorial. So it's very sad that he should have gone to the doctor. That's an indictment of American healthcare, that he was afraid he'd go broke if he went to the doctor.
Well, I think he was a mess until the end, so.
Maybe. He was trying, though. He was working hard. And my friend, who I mentioned earlier, who died, the painter, my friend Lisa Clark, who I'm drawing into my strip, he was her favorite cartoonist, which always made me kind of jealous, actually. So, but I understood why, so.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Chris.
Hi. How you
It's
doing?
a bit of more of a technical question, but I find like a lot of illustrators, when they want to show emotion, they kind of exaggerate the features, whereas you obviously it's kind of your more graphic, simple style, but I feel you convey perhaps a lot more emotion than they do sometimes with like a subtle head movement or just very subtle, like a shoulder. How would you say you kind of do that? Is that just observing the films you do, or television, or just people, or do you have some kind of method for it?
I just keep drawing it until it feels right. This is like one of the secrets of cartooning for cartoonists in the audience, which is you need to learn to listen to your drawings. And by that, I mean when you're drawing them, you read the images, not the words, and you listen to how they sound in your mind. And if it doesn't sound right, then you got to fix something. It's sort of like composing music. And you can sense when you've drawn a character that's reacting emotionally in a way that is insincere or false. And I realized early on that I had just imbued television when I was a kid in high school. I watched TV all the time. I watched TV from morning to night. I would fall asleep watching David Letterman, eating a bag of Doritos and drinking orange soda and pass out, with the TV on. So I completely cut TV out of my life because I realized then I was drawing people to act the way that people acted on television, which is a complete lie. And I wanted to try to pay attention to how real people acted. So I just started doing that. And you kind of have to just be very tough with yourself. And now when I look at my stuff, I feel like it's overplayed. Cartoonists like Nick Draghtsman have turned it down even farther a little bit, and he keeps things very quiet. And by contrast, I feel like my work is a little too expressionistic sometimes. So, and the filmmaker, and Nick does this thing that the filmmaker Ozu does occasionally, which is when they say something very painful, vulnerable, and difficult, they smile, which is a really strangely powerful thing to do because it doesn't have to do with what the body's doing, but it has something to do with what the mind is doing. So I need to take out the trash. I have an alarm set here. So cartoonist life.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask you about when you're assigned to do covers, because I think that, because I work in a magazine, like my department, we do the covers.
Okay.
So I'm really curious about what is your process, especially I'm very curious specifically about the New Yorker covers because I think the subjects are very difficult, at least in my opinion. So if you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And you said you worked in what?
I work in the art department of a magazine. We do covers.
All right.
We ask for example, the illustrator or the photographer to do the cover.
Well, the first thing is that the New Yorker doesn't publish illustration on their covers. They might publish illustrators, but the New Yorker is unique now in the magazine world in that Françoise Mouly, the art editor, allows cartoonists and artists and illustrators, whatever you want to call yourself, to send in images of their own devising, and that image will appear, if it appears, without any accompanying type telling you what to think, which it seems like is a lesson that no single other newspaper or magazine editor has learned. That's the way magazines used to actually be, is there'd be a single drawing with no words on it, and the image, you looked at the thing, and you figured it out yourself. It's like going to an art gallery and seeing a painting. The New Yorker is the last magazine that still takes that approach. They have that flap that they put on the airline copies that tells you everything that's in the goddamn magazine off the side that kind of ruins it. But if you get it in the mail, you just see the picture, and that's it. The logo's there, of course, but that's just kind of like a frame. So Françoise has been nothing but generous and supportive to many generations of artists now, starting with, Saul Steinberg and up to the youngest artist, and Sergio Garcia, who I'm going to see tomorrow in Granada, who's done so many wonderful covers, and I'm sure that she's just like, do whatever you want. We love your work. It's like just being invited to paint on a wall or something. So that's the secret, is you trust the artist to have a brain, to have something to say about human life in a way that is free. and means something rather than being about something, if that makes sense. So, I don't know. I feel very lucky. It's like the only, there must be other magazines out there I don't know about that allow for that. But that was the standard in the 30s, like with Fortune magazine and even a lot of the Time Life publications was to, and Charles Sheeler and great painters. Ben Shahn, you can see in this very museum, did covers for Fortune magazine that were his own paintings with no words telling you what to think. So it's, to me it seems, editors don't like putting pictures out there without telling the, you know, they're very uncomfortable in a wordless world, I think, so, which is fine, you know, they're writers, so, and my mom was one and my grandfather was one, so now I'm gonna be in trouble for saying that, but anyway, sorry to go on and on, so.
Thank you.
And as far as New Yorker covers go, I try to just do things that have, in some cases, either happened to me, or I've seen, or that I've thought of when I've just been alive in the world, so that's just what I do. Other artists do much stranger and more interesting work, though.
So you talk about European and American comics and books, but you don't talk like about Asians. So my question is that if you are into Asian comics or manga, that we call.
Okay. I'm not sure if I understand the one word, the
Asian comics, manga.
Asian comics? Oh, like
yeah,
manga?
that if you are into it and you like it,
Oh,
or
sure.
you read it.
I like all kinds of comics. Yeah, sure. I really like the really, really early Japanese comics, like from the 20s and 30s. That stuff is completely whacked out. It is still to this day, it's just mind-blowing. Tagawa was an artist who did these books about little dogs who are in the Japanese army, and my few Japanese friends are saying, you really shouldn't like that strip. It's about imperialism. I mean, it's so beautiful. They're like, no, you really don't want to, you know, so. But they're beautiful books. Again, in Japan, a similar thing happened where it sort of became a little more cinematic, so I really like the early stuff. There's some pages at the Billy Ireland Museum in Ohio of experimental Japanese newspaper pages that are the most insane things I've ever seen in comics. Bizarre mixes of drawing styles and little tiny panels and big giant panels. They're incredible. I've never seen anything like it. And they've never been reprinted anywhere. So my daughter read tons of manga when she was 13, 14, 15, which they lined her wall. So I looked at some of those and found them very interesting. So I tend to like them more experimental 60s stuff. So like Seiji, oh no, I can't remember his name. I hate it when this happens. I'm sorry, old cartoonist. Also Nakazawa, who did I Saw It, an incredible story of he witnessed the atomic bomb in Hiroshima. Barefoot Gin is a series that he did. It's one of the most emotionally powerful comics ever drawn. It's one of the greatest comics ever. So, but anyway.
Thank you.
Sure. And there's a great American-Japanese comic scholar named Ryan Holmberg who's been responsible for almost reprinting everything like that Drawn and Quarterly has put out. And they've been doing fantastic books of things that the Japanese cartoonists were doing 30 years before any American cartoonists had even thought of it. So.
Hello. Well, I don't know if it's my turn to answer or you were going to say something else.
That's okay. I should say the architect is at fault here. It's very hard to understand. It's like very echoey. So if I don't understand the question.
Okay, no, I haven't asked it yet. I was going to ask about something you said earlier, which is you said that at a certain point the comic book medium started to imitate the film language. So I wanted to ask if you could elaborate on maybe some advantages that the comic book medium has from a storytelling perspective, or maybe characterization over film.
Okay, so you're asking about when I talked about comics becoming more cinematic, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And I should say, I still love that stuff. My grandmother's, from whom I sat across at the table, her very favorite comic strip of all time was Steve Canyon by Milton Caniff. And, you know, it's like, that's the strip that started doing that. He was the first artist to really take the cinematic language and turn it into comics. And his stuff is beautiful. It's just, to me, it's not, I look at it and I'm amazed by it. I cannot believe his beautiful drawing and his storytelling. And his still has a little bit of that comics engine to it, you know, but the farther you get away from that, then the more it just becomes these kind of pictures that show moments, I guess. They're not all like that. I'm not damning everything. I think the stuff is still wonderful, and I read it and look at it, and there's fantastic artists who grew up with that stuff, certainly EC Comics, who do great work growing out of that tradition, like Dan Clowes, and his new book is very much based in that way of drawing and thinking, and it's very powerful. So I guess I'm not sure what you're asking.
No, I was asking if maybe you could talk about some specific advantages that you see in in comics for storytelling or characterization of people.
Well, yeah, I mean, it just depends on what you're most comfortable with as an artist. You know, if you grew up with that and it feels real to you, then that's how you should draw. And I've drawn stuff that way too. It's just, and it's an incredibly flexible medium. There's like, it's sort of like, it's like the difference between storytelling and writing. To me, writing is where the words actually carry the action themselves. Storytelling is telling you what happened. It's sort of the question of show, don't tell. And in a lot of cases, I feel like some of that more illustrative stuff shows, like Prince Valiant or something, but that's fine. You know, I don't, you know, there's nothing, I mean, my comic strip diary is basically that. It's like illustrated text. So it's, the comic strip medium is very, very flexible in its language. There's no one right way of doing it. I was just talking about when I was developing that I found this one thing that seemed to work better for creating a sense of a character on a page. It's not, there's no one right way, and that would be awful. I think it's amazing that the great work that comes out of different approaches to comics that I can't even conceive of. So if that maybe answers your question, I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
How you doing?
Hi.
Hi.
I think that one of the keys in your comic books is time and memory. You're always playing with these two things all the time. I see that you're talking about your diary a lot and how your comic books are, in a way, your personal diary and images. Do you think you would be able to tell a story about something that happened to you recently, very recently, or do you need the time to process that, to write it into a diary, and then turn it into a comic book?
That's a good question. I think a lot of what life is experiencing things and not knowing what they were when they happened. Like I've mentioned in a couple of interviews, because it's true, that when I take a trip somewhere, say to Madrid, Spain, I get very nervous and anxious. And I'll, you know, fret in my hotel room, or I'll think, oh God, why did I say that? I hate myself. I should just leave. And then I'll fly back home, and then a week later, I'll think, oh, that was really great going to the Prado, and everybody at the audience, and the talk was so nice, and the cartoonist I met was so kind, and, you know, I had a really good time. And I'll think, I guess I had fun, you know? So it's, and then I think, but wait, I was anxious and nervous the entire time, but it was fun. So I don't know. I don't know how the human mind works, but it seems to be you spend a lot of time going back over things and kind of in a way attaching emotions to them that maybe you didn't necessarily feel at the time. That doesn't mean that there aren't moments where you have profound, difficult, painful emotions, such as the death of somebody you love. That's a completely different kind of emotion and vulnerability. You know, I think we spend a lot of our adult lives trying to tamp down those feelings. It's just a way of navigating the world. But I try to write stories where that is on the surface, where characters and people are at their most vulnerable, because I think that's when we're the most human, really. So, I don't know. So. Okay, well, I can't thank you enough for being here. Thank you. Thank you.